Happy birthday, Your Holiness.
Happy 80th!
Happy birthday, Your Holiness.
Happy birthday, Your Holiness.
Happy birthday, Your Holiness.
Happy birthday, Your Holiness.
Wishing you a wonderful birthday.
Happy birthday.
A happy birthday.
Wishing you a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, sir. Willkommen.
Happy 80th birthday, Your Holiness.
Wishing you a very happy 80th birthday.
Happy birthday, Your Holiness.
Happy 80th birthday, Your Holiness.
Happy birthday! We wish you a happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, Dalai. Happy birthday, Dalai. Happy birthday, Dalai. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Dalai Lama. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Your Holiness.
Happy birthday, Dalai Lama. 生日快乐！お誕生日おめでとうございます。
Happy 80th birthday! Happy birthday!
Thank you for your very many words of wisdom, including be kind whenever possible.
It is always possible.
Thank you so much for all your inspiration over these years.
Thank you for being a force for peace.
Thank you for inspiring peace in the world.
Thank you for everything you give to us to inspire us as artists, to inspire the rest of humanity. All good things flow from you and your good nature.
Thank you for being a force for happiness.
Thanks for all you do for the world community.
Thank you for all the gifts you've given the world. God bless.
From American in Paris. From King and I on Broadway.
Your Holiness, from the Broadway cast of Fish in the Dark.
From King of Siam.
And I.
From the Broadway cast of Beautiful, the Carole King musical.
This is the company of Fun Home on Broadway wishing you a happy birthday.
From the Broadway production of Chicago the Musical.
From the recording studios in New York City, through my heart to you.
Praise to Buddha. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, Your Holiness.
Hey guys, how you doing? I love an audience that answers back. This is Daniel Goleman, who, as you know from the introduction, has written many books. His signature book several years ago was called Emotional Intelligence, which had a massive effect on many people. He's also been friends with the Dalai Lama for decades. Am I right about that? True. And was asked, well, I'll let you tell the story, but was asked by somebody very close to the Dalai Lama to write this new book, A Force for Good. So tell us, how did it come about?
Well, actually, it was a surprise. Usually I plan a book for a couple years, and then I take a couple years to write it. The Dalai Lama's translator, who's an old friend of mine, called me up and he said, the Dalai Lama is going to be 80 years old next summer. Would you write a book for his 80th birthday? And it was kind of one of those requests you can't refuse. So I said, of course, even though I thought it was an insane idea to do a book that quickly, but it happened very smoothly, in part, I think, because the Dalai Lama is such a special person. He makes things happen around him.
You have had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with him, and working on this book, you spent a lot of time one-on-one with him, also two-on-one, you and your wife interviewing him together. What's he like? What's it like to be around somebody like that?
I think it's very telling that the Tibetan word for Dalai Lama is not Dalai Lama. They call him Kundun. Kundun means presence. When you're around him, you get a kind of a automatic high, I think, just by being close to him. And he also is very unusual in that he really loves everybody. He treats everybody the same. He pays no attention to status, rank, money, power. Someone told me that some years ago he went to see Gorbachev when Gorbachev was in the Kremlin. There's a guard like at Buckingham Palace who stands very stiffly on the steps going up. The Dalai Lama is going up the steps. He sees the guard. He goes over and shakes his hand. The guard said, in 25 years of standing here, nobody has noticed me. But that's what he's like.
You ever see him in a bad mood?
Yeah, I once saw him in a bad mood, and it was pretty scary because I didn't think he got in bad moods. But he says himself, you know, when I was younger, I got angry pretty easily. Now these days, I get angry for a reason. He got angry for a reason. There was a guy who had overstepped his role, and he put him in his place very forcefully. And then the next day, my wife and I went to see the Dalai Lama, and he said, were you scared? Actually, I was a little scared. You don't expect it. But, you know, he says anger can motivate you if you can, and can be good if you can use that energy and not flip out about it, but stay focused and energized to take care of a particular goal. I thought that's a very interesting take on anger.
And to be angry not with the person, but with the action.
This is a distinction he makes that's really important. We make it in psychology, too. If you can distinguish, when someone really flips you out, you know, and really gets you going, if you can realize there's a difference between the person, the actor, and the action, what they did, and focus on that action and taking care of that, but still you love the person, because it's usually the people closest to us that trigger us anyway. I think it's very helpful advice.
What is this book about? Is it for Buddhists? Who's it for? What's it about?
This book explicitly is not for Buddhists. He says, I don't want to talk to the same Buddhist audiences. This is a book for everyone. 7 billion people on the planet. He maps out a vision for making our collective future go in the better direction, not the way it seems to go. If you watch the nightly news, you'll excuse me, I know you're a newsman, but the news really is the worst of the day, not what's going on in the world at large.
With the worst people delivering it, for sure.
That was some of the most modest, I would say. But that gives us an unnecessarily pessimistic view of how the world really is. If you think about, you know, all the acts of cruelty and meanness that go on and make the headlines, and then you juxtapose that, you know, like on a scale of justice. One side is all the horrible things that happened that day. The other side is all the good, you know, all the kindness, all the moms and dads helping their kids. It's vastly greater. So he says, don't let that make you pessimistic, and also take a long view of history. If you look 200 years ago, 300 years ago, actually things were much, much worse. They're getting better in terms of like lifespan, literacy, how we treat prisoners, debtors, women, children. I mean, everything has gotten better. And he says in the next century, it can get still better, but each of us has to act.
Nonetheless, there are, while things I think indisputably have gotten better in many, many key areas, there are, as you point out in this book, which I've read and is excellent, some real areas of concern that we need to work on. So let's just break it down. What are some of the key components of what the Dalai Lama wants us to do to make a better planet going forward?
Well, for me, one of the surprising things was he starts inside each one of us. He says, transform your own mind. Don't act from your most disturbing, distressing emotions. Manage them. Stay calm, clear, make really smart, good decisions. Combine that with an attitude of compassion, really caring about other people, not just self-interest, and then act. And his compassion is surprisingly muscular. He says the first thing I'd like to see is get rid of corruption and collusion in the public sphere. Dirty business, dirty politics, dirty religion, clean it up. Well, you don't expect that. You know, it's compassion, at least my stereotype, is kind of Sunday school nice, but he's talking about real activism. He says, look at the growing gap between the rich and the poor. This is a moral crime. We need an economics which makes that gap smaller, not larger. He sees Scandinavian countries, for example, as a great model. He loves it when businesses do good, not just make a lot of money. And there are more and more businesses that are trying to find ways to help as well as be profitable. He says, someday we should have a world where conflict is resolved by dialogue, not war. I think that's a very long-term goal, myself. And he says, we also should pay attention to how we teach our children. We can educate kids so that they naturally have better control over their inner world. They have genuine concern, real empathy for other people, and act from there. So that pretty much is his program. And he says this is a program that's going to be carried out over this century, and it'll really pay off by the end of the century, but each one of us has something we can do toward that end.
Let me start with the first thing you said, because the first thing the Dalai Lama says that we need to do in order to make the world a better place is to transform ourselves.
Right.
Have a more compassionate attitude.
Right.
This can sound a little vague, but actually the Dalai Lama has some specific, scientifically validated suggestions. Can you dive reasonably deeply into that? What can we actually do to be nicer, better people?
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned this book is based in science, really. He keeps up with scientific studies, meets with scientists regularly, and he's incorporated it. One of the things we could do is what you suggested in your book, 10% Happier, which is about mindfulness.
Available at fine bookstores everywhere, ladies and gentlemen.
You can take care of me later for that one, Dan.
I'll grease you later.
Which is a method of looking at our own mind as we're in the midst of the heat of the day and the heat of the moment, and starting to develop a point of leverage, a neutral point where we can decide: am I going to act on that impulse, or am I going to widen the gap?
You got to say what it is, though. You got to drop the M word. A lot of people don't want to do it, but it's meditation. And this is what the Dalai Lama does several hours every morning. He's not saying that we need to do several hours a day, but he is saying that in order to train the mind and train the heart,
right,
meditation is the thing.
Well, he does get up at 3 a.m, but we have to say he goes to bed at 7. So don't try that. He loves to sleep. Meditation, yes, but I think of it really as training attention. In terms of the emotional intelligence model, it's more self-awareness, getting better at self-management. The basic rep in the inner gym is you put your mind in one place, you concentrate, it wanders off. That's what the mind does. You notice it wandered. That's the moment of mindfulness. And then you bring it back. Every time you do that, you strengthen the brain circuitry for focus, for mindfulness. It's like in the gym, every time you lift the weight, the muscle gets that much stronger. Exactly the same. So he says, develop a discipline. Do something to manage your own mind. This is a good one. Then he says, pair it with compassion. And here the science is very strong too. It turns out that if you practice daily the thought, I wish that this person, the people I love would be happy, would be healthy. You wish positive things for them. That people I know, strangers, people everywhere have that. It turns out that strengthens the circuitry for love, particularly the kind of love between a parent and child. And this is the basis of what's called empathic concern, which is one of 3 kinds of empathy. It's the kind of empathy where you genuinely care about other people. The more we have that genuine care for other people, the more we'll act with their benefit in mind.
So it is possible to make yourself nicer?
Believe it or not, Dan.
Luckily, my wife is not watching this live stream.
Nor my wife. But my wife does say the more you practice this kind of stuff, the nicer you are.
And science backs this up. You're not just making it up.
No, the science comes out of Stanford University. I'd like to mention a book by Thupten Jinpa, which is called The Fearless Heart, which takes a program developed at Stanford, studied by neuroscientists there, authenticated as actually working, and it's open to anyone. And it's actually a very good complement to the mindfulness that you're talking about. But these are ways to strengthen the part of the brain which makes us a force for good, which makes us act in ways that have not just our selfish self-interest at heart, but the goodness of what we do and the actual effects and benefits for other people.
I suspect, and I'm just kind of channeling what I suspect might be happening in the minds of some of our audience members, both in the room and at home. People hear the Dalai Lama talk a lot about compassion. You and I are now talking a lot about compassion, but we live in a world that can be tough. And we have people who, some of us have people out there who are competitors, adversaries, difficult people. How, I think some of us might suspect, well, if we treat them with compassion, we're just going to get steamrolled.
Well, the Dalai Lama made a very astute observation some years ago. He said, English lacks a word. Your idea of compassion is for the other person. Actually, in my language, it's for yourself, too. He talks about being wise, selfish, having a compassionate attitude for other people. He says, actually, and the science backs him up, the first person that benefits from compassion is yourself, because it also lights up the circuitry for good feeling. It feels good. And you don't have to be a patsy to be compassionate. You could be very tough. Remember, he says, act strongly if you need to oppose the actions that other people do. So defend yourself, you know. It's not like you're going to let people walk over you. But having done that, then you're in a stronger position to help the other person too.
So there's a way to be more effective in the world when you are motivated by wishing for the well-being of for yourself and everybody around you, so you're not so wrapped up in blind hatred that you're wasting energy.
It goes beyond just hatred. I think it has to do with every day. You know, today we're all challenged attentionally. You walk down the street and every third person is looking at or talking into their cell phone, maybe more. And intrusions, technological intrusions, happen all the time in a way they just did not 20 years ago. In 2007, Time magazine had a little squib. It says there's a new word in the English language, pizzled. It's a combination of puzzled and pissed off. And it's how you feel when the person you're with takes out their BlackBerry and starts talking to someone else. The fact that they said BlackBerry tells you how dated it is. But, the norms for attention have changed, and now we accept intrusions. What it means is we don't notice the people around us as much as we used to. And so I think that's another reason for mindfulness, for deciding when someone else is going to capture your attention.
Does the Dalai Lama think that war can ever be justified?
You wouldn't think he would say yes, but there are circumstances. Remember, he has this idea of a muscular compassion which opposes wrong action. And that could lead to war. It could lead to, physical resistance in the right circumstance. He also, at the same time, cautions that if you're going to do that, you have to be very careful. He doesn't want to see collateral damage. Not acceptable, because that's the lives of innocents and hurting innocents. But he does see that there are situations in which muscular compassion might mean that too.
What's his economic view? He's described himself as a Marxist.
Well, he does that, I think, to be provocative. I mean, I'm a Marxist too, but I'm a Groucho Marxist, not a... So what he means is that he is more fascinated and thinks it's more important that we think about how resources are distributed. This speaks to the gap between rich and poor. He says, we don't need more billionaires. Why would you want to be a billionaire? You've only got one stomach, he says. But on the other hand, the question is, how do we get there? So he rejects, actually, the communist experiments. He actually fled the Chinese communist dictatorship in Tibet. He says, those regimes were ruined by corruption and by collusion and so on. What we need is something like Sweden. What we need is a country that takes care of everyone. In those countries, everybody has health care. College is free in those countries. And the gap between the richest and the poorest is among the smallest anywhere, yet people are well off.
You mentioned this earlier, but it might be worth unpacking a little bit. He talks a lot about the importance of education. I would say, in having read your book, that in many ways it's perhaps the premier plank in his platform for building a better world. And one of the things he wants to do when it comes to education is, to use the term that you use, he talks about employing an education of the heart,
exactly.
Teaching us how to be more compassionate, and drawing upon some of the practices that have been employed for centuries, if not millennia, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Is there a possibility that in this vision he will run up against critics who don't want Eastern religion infused into schools?
I think it's very important that we do what scientists now are doing, which is to look at traditional methods like meditation and extract from them using cognitive science, neuroscience, what works. Leave the belief system behind, because you find same practices in many different belief systems. That turns out not to be the essential active ingredient, particularly in helping kids. I was at a school in Spanish Harlem, second graders. Half the kids are what are called special needs, which means they're really tough to teach. And yet the classroom was really calm and focused. And I asked the teacher why. She said, well, watch. And then they had their daily session of what they call belly buddies. These are 7-year-old kids. They go to their cubby, they get their favorite stuffed animal, they lie on the rug, put the animal on their belly, and watch it rise while they breathe in, fall while they breathe out. 1, 2, 3 on the in-breath, 1, 2, 3 on the out-breath. It keeps them calm and centered. What they're doing is that basic mental rep of keeping their mind on one thing. And I'm a strong advocate personally of teaching kids how to pay attention, along with helping them manage their emotions, get along better, empathize. This is called social emotional learning. There's a large movement in it. The book Emotional Intelligence actually was an argument for this. And the Dalai Lama calls it educating the heart. He would add to that more explicit training of helping kids become more compassionate, more caring, which makes them more cooperative, makes them get along better with other kids. And he sees this kind of education as what will help us get to this better world over the course of the century.
So, but there's a way for us and for parents in the audience to embrace these techniques that are derived from Eastern spirituality in a way that won't be offensive to other parents who might be fervent believers in Christianity.
I think the way to do it is to take it through the filter of science. And to, as I said, see what works. The Dalai Lama once said to neuroscientist Richard Davidson, who's done a lot of this work now, he said, you know, in Eastern traditions, we have a lot of methods for managing destructive emotions well. Please take them out of the religious context, study them rigorously in the lab, and if something works, spread it as widely as you can. Well, in spreading it as widely as you can, you've left behind the Eastern origin. What you're doing is seeing what's scientifically grounded, evidence-based. I think that's the way to go.
I'd love to get you to talk a little bit about the Dalai Lama's attitude towards science, because he is, on many levels, a religious leader. He wears robes, he rings bells, lights incense, and certainly believes, or must believe in the concept of rebirth, because he is the 14th, if I get it wrong, if I've got it right, Dalai Lama. So he's a reincarnation, they believe. But he has said, first of all, he's worked very closely with scientists. You just talk about Richie Davidson, the neuroscientist from the University of Wisconsin. He has also said that if science disproves anything that's a part of his religion, he would drop it.
Yeah, he takes a very radical stance as a religious leader. He has been an avid science buff since he was in Lhasa as a kid. There were 2 cars in Lhasa. There were no roads in those days.
Lhasa being the capital of Tibet.
He took them both apart and put them both together again so they worked. I mean, he's got that kind of mind. And he sees science as another way to reach reality and not at all incompatible. He says, if science proves something we believe is wrong, we'll change our belief. Pretty radical.
Pretty radical. We've got a little time for questions. Would love questions from the audience. Sir, we're going to come at you with a mic. There you go.
Hello, Dan. Hello, Daniel. Huge fan of your work with emotional intelligence. I'm curious, would you say Dalai Lama epitomizes person who reached ultimate emotional intelligence? And also, what's the one thing that you learned from being around and hanging out with Dalai Lama that made the most impact on your life?
So I love the way you put it. I think he probably is the pinnacle of emotional intelligence. When you realize emotional intelligence has to do with self-awareness, managing your inner turbulent emotions, empathy, connecting with other people, and social skill. I've seen him in many different situations. As I said, he relates to everybody. One of the things that really impacted me was something like that Kremlin incident. I've been backstage with him, for example, in San Francisco when he was waiting for the mayor who was late. He was going to give him the key to the city. And all these, bold-faced names and celebrities and luminaries are backstage. And he goes over and hangs out with a stagehand. I was shadowing him for the book in Vancouver, and he was at a meeting with 20 CEOs who asked him all kinds of questions. They'd hired a photographer who was taking pictures for the occasion. And at one point, the photographer ends up on the floor with a big telephoto lens at His Holiness. And His Holiness stops what he's saying. He's very amused, looks down and says, "Why don't you take a nap while you're down there?" At the end, the photographer lines everyone up for a formal picture, and that breaks up. As it's breaking up, the Dalai Lama says to to the photographer. He says, come here. And he holds them real close and tight for a picture together. That really has been an eye-opener for me in terms of how I unconsciously, I think we all do, relate to other people. There's research out of Berkeley that shows that in a two-person situation, the more powerful person, the higher status person, actually pays less attention to the other person. And I've tried to get better at that as a result of being around him. Great question, thanks.
He's always ignoring me. We're running a mic over to you. Stand by. This young woman is getting her cardio in for the day.
I am here like probably everyone else because we probably already believe in the principles that the Dalai Lama espouses. What I'm concerned about is what about the people who are not part of the choir? How do we reach them?
That's a wonderful question, and I think that's why he's done a book which is for everyone. The book is reflected, I started writing this book, my wife said, the Dalai Lama wants to reach everyone, particularly young people. This has got to be reflected on the web. There's a web campaign, joinaforceforgood.org, with 4 is the number 4, which reflects everything in the book. But he also says, I would like to see an education of the heart as a universal standard, because he takes the long view. He says the people of the 20th century, people who are not part of the choir, it's too late in a way. We want to start with people while they're young and shape them in a way where they'll be genuinely caring and compassionate for the rest of their lives. So he says, this is going to happen by the end of the 21st century. He's very patient.
I think also in terms of reaching people who are not part of the choir, to use your term, that's, I think, why he relies so heavily on science, because it is the lingua franca in our culture.
And that's what he says, that, he says, if I were to speak from a religious platform, I'd reach very few people, and I really care about everyone. I mean, it's really a compassionate thing he's doing. And so I'm going to base what I say on science, because, as you say, science is a universal lingua franca.
We have time for more questions. There we go. There's somebody.
Hey, guys. Thanks for being here today. Daniel, I'm just curious. How did you strike up your friendship with the Dalai Lama to begin with?
Oh, so I was...
By the way, cool T-shirt, Imperial Teen. Great band.
I met him at Amherst College in the 80s. He was invited there by Bob Thurman, who's famous as Uma's dad. When I met the Dalai Lama, I just started at the New York Times as a science journalist. And when he met me, he said, oh, you're a science journalist. I'd like to meet with scientists. I'm really interested. And that started a series of some very in-depth meetings, several of which I helped organize and moderate, with scientists of all kinds, cosmologists, astrophysicists, quantum physicists, neuroscientists, cognitive scientists. He's done this regularly, and he loves learning. He's an avid learner. And so I've had a role in this. And people say, well, you're a friend of the Dalai Lama. It's not like, hey, let's go have some beers or something like that. It's more meeting him in these contexts and then having private meetings. So it was really around science that we got together.
Back to you, Dan.
Thank you very much for coming today. Really appreciate it. Thank you.